Thank you, Stefan. I want to thank you all for coming. What Stefan said is right, and it's remarkable to me because as I was driving down here this earlier today, I was thinking, my gosh, I can't believe that it's actually been 4 years since I came to this room and gave a talk about my previous book. And I'm thinking, you know, from my perspective, 4 years, it's gone by really fast. It doesn't seem like all that much has happened. I've written some more books. I've had a chance to talk with a lot of people. But then I was thinking, my gosh, in Google time, 4 years is incredible. I mean, think how much must have changed here. So when I came here 4 years ago, I had a very specific point that I wanted to make to people, which was that we don't draw enough. And we tend to not think very well because we don't use our visual mind very well. So my first book was all about solving problems with pictures. And I realize now, as the years have gone by, that a lot of things have changed in these last 4 years in terms of helping us think visually. There have been a lot of books that have come out about visual problem solving. There's been a lot of interest around creating applications that people can use to help them articulate software that are more visual. And there's been a whole slew of tools that have been released online, many of them belonging to you, that allow us to communicate using pictures a lot more effectively than we could in the past. But I also realize that we're not there yet. In these last 4 years, we haven't gotten to the point where we've solved all of our problems. We still seem to have these challenges ahead of us. And what I really wanted to set out to do as I was working on this new book was kind of double down and say, if my first book was just about using pictures, what I want to talk with you about today and what my new book is about is using that combination of words and pictures to make every idea that we have become incredibly clear. Because I think that the story I'd like to share with you is a pretty simple one. As I think about the ideas that are out there, there are so many of them, and we now have so many different channels by which people communicate their ideas to us, it all starts to sound after a little while like this, just this endless wall of words of blah, blah, blah descending upon us. It's really difficult to begin to understand what are the ideas that we really want to pursue? What are the things that are really interesting to us? So what I want to share with you today is this simple idea of, can we move from a world that looks like that to a world where maybe we can start to think about how we can communicate our ideas better by using fewer words. We're still going to use words, but we're going to help make those words become incredibly powerful by introducing the idea of combining them with pictures. And so I think that the best way to start out to make this real is I'd like to start out with kind of two different case studies of organizations I've worked with over the last couple of years, and they represent kind of a spectrum to me. On one side, an organization that has used pictures exceedingly well to explore really complex ideas, and then that's the good side of the spectrum. And then on the bad side of the spectrum, an organization that hasn't used pictures at all and communicates miserably. So I'd like to start with the good one. On the good side, a couple of years ago, I had a chance to go up to Seattle and work with a number of the program managers that are overseeing the development of the new 787, the new Dreamliner, arguably the most complex machine that has ever been made. And what they shared with me is it's even more complex than I had thought, because the 787 is being built at the same time in 17 different countries by people speaking 13 different languages. So for example, the fuselage section in the front, everything that's in light blue is built in the United States. Everything that's in green, the main fuselage component, is being built in Italy. Everything that's in red is being built in Japan. Everything that's in yellow is being built in China, etc. So the question I had is, how is it possible for someone in, say, Shanghai, let's say the person who's working on the wing root, to know how to build their component to within tolerances of, in some cases, millionths of an inch, so that it perfectly lines up with a component being built by someone in Italy and a component being built by someone in Japan. All the pieces get shipped back to Seattle and they snap together and they fit. Well, the thing that they showed me up at Seattle is the reason they're able to do that is because everything, every aspect of the design, maintenance, construction, training, everything that has to do with that machine is communicated through pictures. It's as if they've replaced spoken language completely. And I'm not just talking about really sophisticated computer-aided design. I mean, Boeing has had that for decades. What is interesting here is the creation of a global network of a visual language, so that if I have a question about what am I supposed to do, I don't need to read anything. I go online, I look at the picture, and I see what I'm supposed to do. And the really remarkable thing is that in the end, it actually flies. It works. So that's a really good example. That's the good end of the spectrum. And I promised you that I'd show you a bad end of the spectrum as well. So I want to talk to you about an organization where I think communication doesn't work at all. Now, I have had an opportunity to work with the United States Senate and a number of different governmental organizations, and the reality is people are incredibly smart, people are working very, very hard, but the problem is that often, because it's all about politics, the ideas that this guy is generating, he wants to make absolutely sure that this guy does not understand. I want to make sure that you don't know what I'm doing. It's secret. This is my political agenda. Well, that's part of the problem. The other problem is that even when those people agree on what they're trying to do, the result of their work looks like that. Think of how invested you have to be in this piece of policy or this idea to be willing to drill all the way down through it to try to figure out what's it really about. It doesn't work. It doesn't fly. And in the end, we end up with people who become really politically agitated because they don't know what it is that Washington is actually trying to say. What is the solution? We don't know. So what I want to share with you is something that I think is a tool that can help clarify this. How do we use the pictures and the words, put them together? This is something that I call vivid thinking. Now, vivid is a mnemonic. Now, I am one of those people, my memory just sucks. It's not anywhere near as good as it could be or as I'd like it to be. So I rely on mnemonics and visual devices all the time to help me remember things. So let me walk you through what vivid actually stands for. So the VI stands for visual. The V stands for verbal. And the ID stands for interdependent. So if we put that together, what do we have? Visual, verbal, interdependent thinking. That's the kind of thinking I want us to have. And then an idea will become truly vivid. Now, there's a more vivid way to describe that. So what it means is I'm no longer going to believe that you know what you're talking about if you can just talk about it. No matter how articulate you might be, I'm not going to believe you have fully explored your idea if you can only talk about it. Nor am I going to believe that you have fully explored your idea if you can only draw it. Vivid thinking means that we will combine both. And for some neurobiological reasons that we'll talk about in a few minutes, this is the really critical factor. When we want our mind to light up on an idea, when we have an idea, we want to share it with someone, when we combine words and pictures, which most of us have never been taught to do, it's almost magic that happens the way it lights up other people's minds and our own. So what vivid thinking really is, for anybody who has an opportunity to look through my book, vivid thinking in the end of the day is a very simple set of tools that, since most of us believe we are primarily verbal, and that's what we've been taught in school, so our default thinking process for most of us involves writing or speaking. What Vivid does is it gives us a very simple set of tools to overlay on top of those words and say, if I had to create a visual to complement those words, what would I do? Because I don't know how to draw. It tells us, vivid thinking tells us exactly how to do that. The reason why this works, there are a couple of unwritten rules about visual problem solving and vivid problem solving, and I want to share with you the most important one. It goes like this. Whoever best describes the problem is the person most likely to solve the problem. Now, what I mean by that is, if any of you are in a position to assign budgets or to assign work to others, and I'm assuming many of you are, if someone came running into your room and said, give me money, the sky is falling, I'll fix it, you're probably going to say, not so fast. But if the person came in and said, look, I've started to map out the problem, and I've realized that when these people or these constituents get together in this way, there seems to be a series of consistent outcomes. And what I'd like to do is explore why this one always goes badly. Could you give me some more money to explore it? The fact is, the person who has already begun to map out the problem is the person who proves that they have the greatest grasp of it, and also is beginning to find what the solution is likely to be. So the really mercenary subtext here, and this is true, is whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. Absolutely true rule number one, whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. We don't see this rule very often because we don't draw very often. But every time somebody does, they win. And I want to show you the best example of this ever, the best sort of back of the napkin, simple visual idea ever. So we're out here in the Bay Area. Let's fly out here to Washington. As I've mentioned, I had a chance to work with the Senate and the US Navy and some other organizations in DC. And after one of my talks, a guy came up to me who was head of the new policy for the United States Senate, for the Democratic side of the Senate. And he said, Dan, I have the perfect, simple picture back of the napkin story for you from politics. And he shared this picture, and it goes back to 1974. So we're talking kind of ancient history now. When President Ford was in power. President Ford ran a very conservative, fiscally conservative administration. There was a very popular economist at that time. His name was Arthur Laffer. USC economist, very conservative in his views, who spent a lot of time in DC doing consulting for the Ford administration. So one night, Arthur Laffer goes out to a bar with two senior aides to President Ford. They go to a bar in Washington, DC, and they start talking about taxation and monetary policy. And at one point, Laffer pulls out the cocktail napkin and he says, guys, I have an idea. Do you mind if I draw a little picture for you? And the two guys he's with said, no, go ahead. So on his napkin, Laffer draws a very simple little XY plot, something I'm sure all of us have done at one time or another. And since they're talking about taxation, on the horizontal axis, he maps out the percent tax rate that the government is charging on our income from 0% up to 100%. And on the vertical scale, he maps out how much money does the government actually collect in tax revenue from $0 up to lots and lots of dollars. And he says to the guys that are there in the bar with them on this napkin, he says, okay, so if the government charges us 0% income tax, how much money is the government going to make? 0. And then he said, but think about this. If the government charges us 100% income tax, how much money is the government going to make? Also 0, because no one will work. Think about that. If every single penny of every dime of every dollar that you earned came in one pocket and you immediately had to pay all of it back out in income tax, what would be the point of even working? You might as well just forget about it, just go to the beach. So he said, he drew on his napkin, what actually seems to happen is there must be some kind of a curve that goes like that. And at some point, isn't it interesting that reducing the rate of taxation actually increases the amount of money the government collects? Now, the two guys who were with Laffer that night in the bar thought that was pretty interesting. These are the two guys. They said, can we take that napkin back to show it to President Ford? There is a fundamentally interesting idea in that drawing. He said, please take the napkin. They took and they showed it to President Ford, who was very intrigued by the idea. He got it. He liked it. Ford passed that napkin off to the Republican National Committee, who then passed that napkin off to the economics team of a guy named Ronald Reagan, who was thinking of running for president. And quite literally, that napkin sketch became the basis of Reaganomics. That is the first instance anywhere in the public record of anybody ever talking about what became known as supply-side economics. The idea, when someone would come to President Reagan and they'd say, wait a minute, in order to increase taxable revenue, government revenue, you're going to decrease the rate of taxation, especially for the wealthy? What? He would draw them out that picture. And they'd say, oh, I get it. Now, the interesting part about this story is the two guys who were with Arthur Laffer that night in the bar are these two guys. Former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and former Vice President Dick Cheney were the two guys who were sitting in the bar that night with Arthur Laffer. It was those three guys with that cocktail napkin who basically invented Reaganomics that night in that bar. That became pretty much underlying American economic policy for most of the last 30 years. And we are still debating to this day, is it a good idea or not? But here's the question I have. Who says a simple little sketch on the back of a napkin doesn't have power? It has extraordinary power. That's what I was referring to when I was saying whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. The person who comes up with the visual clarity of their idea always wins. For a very simple reason. We are of two minds. And I am not talking about left brain and right brain thinking. Everybody's familiar with the idea of right brain and left brain thinking. One of our hemispheres is creative and one's analytical. No, it is nowhere near that simple. Now, one thing we do know is that the brains of all mammals, all mammal brains, have a bilobed neocortex. The part on the top of the brain is split in half. But as far as we can tell right now, to the limit that tests allow us at this point, humans seem to be the only mammal in which it is true the two hemispheres have evolved to have slightly different function. And now we are beginning to realize what the difference between the two hemispheres of our brain really is. And it boils down to something like this. One half of our brain has evolved to become really good at looking at the world in terms of little bits, pixels, little bits of focus. The other half of our brain has evolved to become really good at being the glue that pulls them back all together. So there's another way of looking at this that says this part of our brain has evolved to be really good at focus. Somewhere in our evolutionary past, it was very important for us to be able to scan the horizon and see the one thing that we wanted to go get. But if we only focus on that, we're going to be attacked by something from behind us. So the other half of our brain evolves to be really good at peripheral vision. Pretty fascinating. What we're starting to find is that half our brain is really good at the focus, and the other half is good at the larger picture. That's what we know. Another way to think about this, the way this has further evolved, one way to diagram this out looks something like this. One half of our brain does want to see the world like that. Little bits, letters, words, can I break it down into its elemental pieces? The other part of our brain wants to say, that's not what it's about. It's about the whole thing. Now what's interesting is both of these are the same, and yet of course both of these are completely different. Which one is right? Is this the right description, or is this the right description? Well, the answer, of course, is that both of them are the right description, but this is the only one that for most of us in most of our education we are ever taught to develop. We're given verbal syntax, we're given verbal grammar, we're tested on our ability to write a 5-paragraph essay. Our intelligence is judged by our ability to be verbally articulate. When has ever anyone given us a tool? A real tool, in the same way that we have grammar and syntax. When has ever anyone given us a tool that helps us with that part? And yet, actually, this part is bigger than that part. We are more visual than we are anything else. More of our brain is dedicated to processing vision than any other thing that we do. And it's ironic to me that we haven't got tools to take advantage of that. So that's what we're going to focus on now. And to kind of get us moving, I'd like to do a little test with you. Very simple. I'm going to show you 4 pictures. All of them are going to look something like this, and they just go in order A, B, C, D. What I'd like you to do is just look at the 4 pictures. And this, I don't want anybody to stress out. This isn't some kind of test where we need to look for the hidden banana or something like that. I just want you to look at these pictures and see if you can identify that there are some things in the picture. So this is picture A. Do we all agree that there are some things in this picture? Okay, so now I'm going to go on to picture B for a moment. This is picture B. And I'm going to go back and forth a few times. I don't want anyone to stress out. I want you to actually see the differences. So I'm going back to A now. This is A, and this is B. I'm going to go back again, A and B. And let's go back one more time. And this time, as I go from A to B, I want you to ask yourselves a question. How much time do you think might have passed between A and B? How much time do you think might have passed? Anybody? Seconds? Some number of seconds? All right, I think so. So now let's continue. This is picture C. I can hear that many of you are seeing that something else has happened. And now let's go on to the last picture, picture D. And we can see that something else has happened. Now I'm going to go back to C for a second. And I want you to ask yourselves the same question. Between C and D, how much time has passed from this picture to this picture? Hours. So the first transition took place in a number of seconds, and this transition took place in a number of hours. And we're pretty much all in agreement with that. But here's the really remarkable thing. We did all of that without the need to rely on a single word to describe anything that we were witnessing. And yet every one of us saw almost exactly the same thing. If we were to be debriefed later, most of us would say we had witnessed exactly the same thing. It didn't require a single word to do it.